Hey, good afternoon, guys. So, look, this one's going to be a little bit of an update in terms of where we are, kind of price levels, kind of what scenarios are there. And what I want to do is just start off by saying, look, right, this is not bullish or bearish. This isn't any kind of negative sentiment. This isn't any positive sentiment. This is just understanding the kind of the lie of the market, right? Now, obviously, I've talked about three scenarios for the last 18 months, right? And what I want to do is, talk about when I say things like there's no change. There's no change based on, what I'm seeing, right? There's no change based on what I've said. And I'm not going to deviate from what I've said, right? Because at the moment, there's still two of the three scenarios, right? And unfortunately, on the bullish kind of nature, the best case scenario is the one that actually was invalidated, right? So let me just explain this, in logical terms. I'm happy to spend a bit of time doing this video, right? Because it just kind of highlights why I'm saying what I'm saying and where I see these things kind of going next, right? So if obviously you're just looking for a bullish narrative, kind of leave your comments and kind of go. It's not, this is not the video for you. If you're looking for, hey, where do you short this? Again, kind of not the video for you. I think the point being is understanding where we are in the kind of the much bigger picture, right? So first things first, right? I want to go back to a couple of things that I've kind of pointed out and highlighted over the last couple of years, right? Now I'll come into the three scenarios in a second. But what I want to do is just highlight, for me personally, in terms of why I've said what I've said, right? And this is kind of where it brings us to, where it kind of brings us back to, right? So if I take this out on a weekly time frame, right? Now, if I go back to my very first entry, I'm going to be honest with you guys, right? For me, I've bought Bitcoin twice. Right? I've not traded it. I know Paul is more the trader, in that sense. Paul likes to be kind of in and out of the market. For me, I was in the right place at the right time, right? There was no skill. It was just pure luck. So my initial entry takes me back here, right? This was the $11.48 entry that I had, like I said, right place, right time. Very lucky, right? Putting my trading hat on, the very first sale of Bitcoin, right, was here, right? This was my first, hey, I've made some good money, still not quite sure where this is going. Let's kind of, keep some on, right? But at the same time, let's walk away with a nice profit, right? So for me, at this point in time, Bitcoin was kind of a free bet, right? And that's kind of how I've treated it. A couple of months later, right, things start to kind of change in terms of the sentiment. And, kind of this period, right, there was different news articles, different kind of conversations, if you will. And at this particular point, it was, look, I've got this kind of free punt. I've made some money from the first trade. I'm still not 100% in terms of where this can go and why. So I decided to put a second entry in, right? Now, the second entry was $238, right? And this was the very last time that I personally have invested in Bitcoin, right? So at this particular point, as the price then rallies, we get kind of to this indecision candle, right? And I think to myself, do you know what? Again, pretty good run. Let's kind of sell off some more of these coins, right? Now, again, being this kind of free punt, the logic for me at this stage was uncertainty, right? There was no kind of guaranteed future for Bitcoin. It was still not a, not a big thing, right? Now, at this particular point, I kind of dumped quite a lot of coins, first move up, right? So again, kind of very lucky, right place, right time, kind of still sat on coin. And to be honest, right, I'm finding coins every now and again. I go through a hard drive and I think, oh, there's another wallet. And it's kind of weird now looking back, thinking, some of these coins, I was transferring, $100 from here and $100 from there. And it's just kind of moving them around wallets, right? I was testing things like 2018, testing the Wirex stuff. So, for me, I can look back at some of these, hard drives that I've got and think to myself, wow, I remember doing, what I was doing there. Now, it wasn't really until kind of after this period, right? Now, I've talked about this, publicly in some of these streams, right? At this particular point, what I was doing on the venture capital side, the investments we were making as a firm, the kind of technologies that we were into. So our kind of focus was kind of financial technologies, but with a kind of a cyber twist, right? So cybersecurity kind of as a core. And what I was seeing in, events and meetings and seminars and, all these kind of different things that I was kind of attending was the Bitcoin sentiment was kind of more of the general indicator for the kind of the blockchain landscape, right? What I mean by that is companies were starting to build blockchain-based technologies, but Bitcoin seemed to be the kind of the bias and the kind of the direction indicator, right? So at this particular stage, I was able to kind of publicly announce this was the first kind of public post in terms of why for me Bitcoin was long. Right now, I'm going to be completely transparent. I didn't want, didn't end up trading this particular move because my entry was still down low. Right, I'm still sat in a couple of coins, and it was like, hey, this is a free punt. Let's see where this thing goes. At this particular point, right, the price obviously rallies, and this was the first kind of indication that we were actually on to something, right? And this is going back to 2020 now. Right? Now, when we get to this particular stage, I posted this about the reaccumulation, right? So let me just kind of come in. This was 2021, June, July, so actually January 2021 was the update, right? So I talked about this in terms of, most people playing with Bitcoin, right? Now, this was a big, big thing for me because seeing this from the venture capital side, seeing how people were, I guess, kind of uncertain of where this could go, why it could go, right? This was the kind of area from a reaccumulation perspective. I personally had a little bit of doubt, right? Now, at this particular point, I ended up getting rid of quite a lot of my, my kind of my coins that I had left, right? So it was at this particular stage, I kind of thought to myself, I've taken out, I've kind of cashed out, I've cashed out, I've cashed out, been very lucky. I'm still treating this as a free punt, right? Then ultimately we start to rally up. Now, as we start to rally up, there was the one thing that made me post about the blew up the rocket core, right? And it was this particular candle here, right? This was really the kind of the buyer's climax into the AR type move up to the UT, followed by the UTAD and down, right? Now, what I found fascinating about this, and this is one of the reasons I actually sold off, at this particular point, right? This was kind of part of, we've come down to a daily time frame. At this particular stage, right, I've gone literally now, I've gone probably 90% out of Bitcoin altogether, right? And that was just me kind of being, what kind of suited me personally. This was the kind of stage where I thought to myself, well, actually, there is something kind of bigger picture. There's something for the bigger picture. There's something for the long term, right? So obviously, I call these calls in terms of short, why I was seeing this as the kind of the buyer's climax, why this would actually bring us down to the 28. I've talked about this time and time again. This level was all to do with the liquidity, right? We come into liquidity, we kind of grab it. Now, the issue that I have, and this is where these three kind of scenarios come in. Right? So I'll come into these in a second. I just want to explain how you kind of build up to where these are. Right? The issue that I had is we didn't spend enough time, right, to really get kind of cooking here. So we rally up, and it wasn't until this particular point, right, where I started talking about, and I think in the realism post, I think I talked about this, yeah, this particular move, right? I talked about you know, why we would do what we would do, right? Why this was the 24th of August 21, right? Why we were likely drop down 3, 4, why we would come basically all the way back up to 65k, and then we're going to see 40k again very quick, right? So these were the kinds of things that were, pretty obvious, right, in terms of the level. So, this was put a line on there, this was the 24th of August, this was the 23rd, why we would drop down, and then why we would come up to the 65k, which was, there. And then we're going to see 40k again very quick, right? So 40k was there, right? So you can kind of see, again, kind of liquidity playing the game, right? So all of these things kind of, front and center, right? And just, being kind of open as to, why for me, not interested in taking this long, why I wasn't selling anymore at this particular point. The reason for not kind of cashing out 100% at this particular stage, right, was if we were to see a move that took us up and back here, right, we would have had almost the base based on these levels, right? To kind of see us through up to, ridiculous highs, 100K, 200K, and beyond, right? Because you would have changed the narrative in terms of the actual price action overall, right? However, we didn't get that. So we kind of come back down, we almost test kind of the undersides of these, right? And then we kind of fall down. Now, at this particular point, I'm saying to myself, how long does this thing go? Where does this thing kind of come to? Why does this thing kind of come to a range? Now, if we were to stick the Elliott count on, right, we would have to say this was potential a large scale 1, which takes us down to a large scale 2. We could argue A, B, C. The only issue being is if you were to look at this from an accumulation perspective, right, as we come into what you'd regard as the kind of this climax, right, unless this was the climax, right, the only issue with this being a climax is the AR is kind of not really valid as an AR. Right? It's not a pretty AR, right? Put it that way. Now, what happens if we don't have a pretty AR? Well, this, right? You kind of have this kind of pig ugly type move, right? So let's assume that we were accumulating. Now, what we've done is we've done pretty similar here. On a larger scale, we haven't really accumulated an awful lot, right? Which means the upside moves are kind of capped. Right? So in an ideal world, the scenario 1 of the 3, right? I'll come into another chart in a second, right? The scenario 1 of 3 was taking this accumulation, right? And this is why I've talked about these levels the way that I've talked about them, right? We come up and find the first, where's my first Bitcoin? I think it is actually this one. So the point is, the best case scenario, and this is where the kind of the bullish narrative kind of changed for me in terms of we're not bullish enough yet, right? And I think that's kind of the key point. We're not bullish enough yet. Right? It's bullish to a degree, but it's also bearish to a degree, right? And I think this is the kind of the issue that I have. If we were to look at what kind of happened, kind of sub this range, right? The volume levels compared to the volume over here is pretty subpar. Right? It's pretty shitty grand scheme of things. We then kind of break up, right? Now, as we break up through this level, in an ideal world, what we would have loved to have seen is this, right? Kind of collecting and spending a little bit more time, right? For us to potentially do something like this, right? That would have been the optimal move, right? Because at that stage, you could really expect, a base being built up and above these levels, right? And kind of off to the races. However, come back one. The issue that we then have now, right, is we have 2 scenarios left. Because for me, once we kind of reached this here, right, we kind of invalidated the larger scale accumulation. Right? And again, to give you kind of ideas in terms of, the scale of accumulation, we're talking about a 0-1 move, right? Now, 2 to 3 should be, a lot more intense, right? That's kind of the motive wave. Anything Elliott wave, kind of related. The reason that they have the golden rules is, ultimately 4 can't cross into territory 1. That's kind of one of the golden rules. The second golden rule is that 2 can't come lower than the 0. And the third one is leg 3 cannot be the shortest, right? So in terms of these 3 scenarios, right, the issue that I have with first one, the best one, right, being kind of invalidated and it kind of goes long from here, right, is we never really come back to test it, right? So we've got a gap sitting here, we've got liquidity sitting there, right, and we've got an awful lot of interest here, right? Now, I've talked about things like retail sentiment, obviously social media sentiment, right? Bigger picture, right? So, second case scenario is something that I talked about in terms of the move B, right? And this particular one here, right, zoomed in, is the ideal scenario, right? 4A, basically creating a monster. And this is why, I think, for me, this is still kind of, for the bigger picture, the best move on the table. If we were to assume this was kind of closed as a 1, we come back down for a 2. If we've had a very quick, 1, 2, 3, right, down, so an ABC, the issue that we have is we haven't collected enough, right? And this takes me back to the same kind of scenario, same kind of concern, right? In every direction, right? And the concern is probably the biggest thing, right? So we come down now. Ideally, around 48, 50K is the kind of optimal, right? Now, again, it's Bitcoin. You can expect a couple of grand's worth of a kind of a run up and a rally up, right? So if I was to put, let's just put a box instead of a line, right? If I was to put a box, we got 48, realistically, 48 to about, there, to about 53, right? It's kind of the optimal zone, right? So at this particular stage, we come up, we kind of ping it there, right? Now, you kind of think, well, what have we done then? We kind of fired through these levels from this, right? Which means a very, very small base. And you're talking about a move that you want to see fly through, 100K. This is the issue, right? We've created this kind of indecision move at this particular point, right? So even if we just kind of said, look, let's wrap that kind of in half. What have we got in and around here? We've got gaps down low that weren't filled. We got bigger gaps here, right? We've got obviously the indecision there. We've got a gap over here. We've got a larger gap there. Can you see what we've done? We've left an awful lot of interest on the table, right? And it's not interest in terms of just, where people want to buy. It's, where shorts have been, positioned, for example. A lot of people gone, oh, well, I don't see this kind of going any further. Let's sell it, right? Now, if you're going to trade something like Bitcoin, especially with the hype that it has, shorting it is kind of almost a silly thing to do, right? But buying it at the tops is also a silly thing to do. You got to look at this almost like the S&P, right? You know that these things are going to have pullbacks. You know that these things are going to move. So the issue then being is the second option, right? Now, you say, well, how far does it go for a B? If you don't understand these Elliott wave type moves, right? Come and look at this website. Now, I'll put a link to this website down in the in the actual section underneath the video. Right? Now, we've got an expanded flat. Right? There's two likely scenarios. We got an expanded flat. Right now, the expanded flat basically takes us up and above 123. Right, so 123% of wave A. Right? So if we were to put something like this, we have to come down from the low because this is technically the wave A, right? This is only an option. Right? This isn't what I'm saying. This is, so you've got to consider this as one of the options, right? So 123% takes us to just shy of 82K, right? So there is an option that we could still have on the table right now, right? This could be our move. Let's just draw it as an ABC. This could be our move A, followed by a move B, right? Which means we still get a C, right? Now, coming back to the site, if we look at what a C wave could be with something like this, right? The relationship of C, right, could obviously be somewhere between 1, 2, 3, right? And obviously 1, 6, 1. Now, the only issue for me with that, right, is I don't think that's necessary, right? I think that there's a couple of clear, obvious plays. We've got massive liquidity down there, right? And that's not denying that for a second. We've got, again, let's put some lines on. We've got some liquidity sat kind of underneath. We've got some liquidity sat kind of underneath, right? We've obviously got a nice little bit of indecision there. So, kind of areas of interest, right? I probably would say this as well, right, is a nice, kind of optimal area, right? Now, the issue that we have here is if we were to do a similar thing, right, and we come from the top this time down here, right, to where we're looking at, is I don't think, I don't think we come down to 12K. If I'm honest, I think if we come under 20K, right, again, we'd be looking at, kind of 17 to 19, probably at a maximum, right? And that's just being, generous. I kind of feel this is a kind of sub 30, but kind of above 20 level in general, right? So kind of 30, 30 here being the 100%, right? And the 20 basically being, it was 15, the 1, 2, 3, 6, right? So I kind of feel for me, right, that's kind of the biggest pocket that we likely to come. Right? I don't think we go down to 12. I don't think we go down to 9. Right? And that's provided, it comes down this far at all. I think the point being is you have to take this in terms of one of the likely scenarios still, right? Because the issue that I have in terms of a bullish case right now is we've come up into an area of liquidity. Right? So let me just kind of clamp this on. Right? We've come to an area of liquidity. We haven't really penetrated, right? The media talks about we've surged past the all-time high. If you zoom in and zoom in, right, we spent under 1 minute above the first, the 69K when we moved up to the 69,300 and a little bit of change. What we then done was we actually rallied up again and we hit, the current all-time high, 70,000, roughly 200 or 199, yeah, 199. Right now, at this particular point, we actually spent maybe 10 minutes there. These are not good indications when you've had kind of a rally with no relief. Hence, part of the issue is one of the options, kind of option 2, in terms of the pullback move, right? All it means is that we're just earlier than anticipated, right? We're earlier than kind of perceived. We're earlier than the news is talking about. We're just early, right? Simple as. Now, if we look at the kind of options here, right, this takes us into one of the options within the expanded flat, right? Now, the next option is technically a running flat, right? Now, obviously, again, similar kind of, wave structure, similar kind of patterns, right? 1, 2, 3%, right? So 123% of wave A. So that kind of puts us, up again, basically at this, 81 and a bit level, right? Let me get rid of these for a second. So that's the next kind of option, right? We've got this kind of 81 and a bit of change as kind of a run-in flat or expanding flat, right, type of move. Now, the only thing that changes here is that the wave C, right, can be a 61% up to 100%. And again, these are not, kind of set in stone. It's my educational content. Is you can't, you can't take Elliott for granted, right? You can't take the Elliott moves as a kind of as a given. Elliott has 3 golden rules, right? And anything kind of outside of that, it's a 50-50, right? If we were to do a similar kind of extension on A back up to B, let's give it the benefit of the doubt at the 82 kind of level, right? You kind of have a range that brings us back down, right, to, exactly the peak of this into the range here, right? That's kind of a semi-realistic kind of pullback move, right? Which means, unlike this first one where we have to come deep, the second one could give us a move that looks a little bit like this, right? That's the kind of range that you're looking for, right? So people are going to say, oh, no, you're wrong. It's going up forever, to infinity and beyond, right? The reality is markets breathe, right? Markets need to breathe. Market needs to breathe to become sustainable, right? So the next thing that I have, people will say things like, oh, well, with these ETFs, the dynamics changed. Retailer buy-in with leverage and so on, so on. So are the leverage funds, right? Now, the leverage funds are trading, by the billion. An ETF tracks the price, right? An ETF isn't the creator of the price. And this is a big, big thing to just be wary of, right? So, a couple of things that I've pointed out in terms of the ETF. People are saying, oh, BlackRock's going to bring trillions of dollars and so on and so on. This goes back, right? I'm going to go back to the 2021 position because 2021 was the biggest amount of AUM, assets under management, right? In terms of ETFs, right? This basically peaked at roughly $10 trillion. That 10 trillion is split across 8,552 ETFs. Right? Keep in mind we've got 12 approved in the Bitcoin sense. So again, take these comments, right, that you're seeing on social media, that you're having kind of across the board, your influencers and so on, right? These kind of Bitcoin maxis. The issue being is you have to put a little bit of realism to the numbers, right? And then, I'm just kind of pointing these things out. Right? So that's the first, kind of major thing, right? So this is why for me, I kind of feel that the best option right now, after we kind of failed in terms of, the accumulation, and just think of what I've just said, right? We failed in terms of an accumulation, right? We didn't accumulate enough to sustain a move. And that's the issue. So we've got kind of option two, right? The kind of the second option as a kind of corrective move still, right? This corrective move is obviously, for me, still the best option for the bigger picture, right? This is the kind of the best option for Bitcoin, for crypto, for the whole marketplace, right? So what could we see that potentially causes this level of move down? We could see some strength in the dollar, right? That's for one. The second thing is we could see an awful lot of short positions come into the market, right, with a lot of leverage. Now, this obviously is maybe more the scary fact, right? If we look at the current COT, right, the commitment to trader report is actually available through the CFTC website, right? And we've just got a bot within Discord to kind of play this out. You can actually see that the shorts are actually increasing, right? Now, a lot of people will say things like, stupid things like, oh, the big boys are getting wrecked. No, the big boys are selling to you at the premium, right? That's no different than the guy who owns the wholesale, the warehouse, buying it cheap, selling it to the customers at an expense, right? And this is how it works. You can buy cheap ticket items in, ramp up the price, and sell it at a premium. Right? That is wholesale to retail, right? And that's part of the game, right? Just keep these things in mind in terms of where we are heading, right? And why. Now, before again, you just think, oh, you're negative, you're bearish. I'm just giving you the scenarios in terms of what you have to take into consideration if you want this to actually thrive, right? So the next question is third option. And a third option was the least of my favorite, right? These were the things that I've talked about in this particular one. I go back, this was back in April 2023, right? This one was covered by Ryan at Uncomplication too, right? And we've had this conversation, myself and Ryan together, in terms of the worst case scenario, right? And I'm talking about this, kind of over a year ago, right? This was kind of already on the cards. I talked about this, we March now. This was obviously April. This was me releasing it to the public. I talked about this with our subscribers, probably 2 or 3 months before this. The worst case scenario, and let me explain why this was the worst case, right, is that when we come back to our Elliott wave moves and cycles, we would have to consider what we've had done. Right? So if we were to consider what we've had done, we've come at this particular point, we put a text on this, right, where technically this was our larger scale one. Right? I'm going to pull that up a bit bigger. Right? Which means if we come down here, and this is our larger scale 2, right, what we can easily do is come inside of this move and start to understand the nested moves inside, right? Let's give this again the benefit of the doubt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Which means this becomes our 1, right? This probably being the 2. We then have inside there a 1, 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5, right? Which let's just assume that we can, I'll do some fib extensions in a second, right? We come back down for a 4, potentially come up for a 5, right? Now, the reason that this is one of the worst case scenarios is that this is our 3, right? And I can run the extensions in a second and explain this a little bit more, right? But you kind of get the picture, right? This is 1, 2, which puts us at 3. Now, what I talked about earlier, right? And obviously, if you're still here, you're still watching this, you clearly have some interest in actually learning this, right? If we can understand that our 1, 0 to 1 was 69k, because that's obviously the dead, 69k dead there. Right? What we'd have to do now is measure this as our 2, which means wherever this ends, right, our end on this, let's just say that we come up to 82. We've got 82, right, minus 15k, right? Because obviously we started 15k up, right? So let's just assume, you know, that's a scenario, that's a plausible option. That kind of range there, right? So it's at 63-ish. Let's just say, 60, 62 with obviously the 15 and a half and whatever we could go 82 a little bit, 83, right? So let's kind of round that down, right? We say 62, again, benefit of the doubt, right? We've got wave 3 equals 62, right? So one of the rules of Elliot, it's actually 2, right? There's 2 golden rules that I can see that we're very likely to already breach. First things first, if this is indeed the 3, we cannot cross inside for a 4, right? So we give ourselves a very limited pullback move before we go again, right? Now, the issue for me, bigger picture, and this is why for me the main, option 1 in terms of an accumulation was definitely the best case scenario. Option 2 is probably a better scenario for where we are today. Option 3 is a very shit bullish case scenario. The reason for it is we've got 69, we've got 62. If we were to draw a line in the middle, right, let's just say we go 62, right, in terms of where we are, we'd have to come down without breaking cycle 1, right, which means we've got a limited base that we create, right? So all of a sudden this move becomes an accumulation, right? Not a reaccumulation. The issue then is we can actually put, with some level of confidence, right? Let's just say from the top of this level here, we can say 65, kind of in the middle, which means our move 5 at this particular stage, right? This is a big picture. Our move 5, right? Which means technically the end of the first, mega cycle for Bitcoin in the Elliott sense. Then you come down ABC. Right? The issue being is that if you look at that, this is a very realistic type of target, right? This is obviously this coming in, we're talking about the level of interest, the ETFs, the monetary value that ETFs bring to the table. The biggest concern for me is the fact that we've actually got COT leverage funds massively short. So what I'm hoping for is that this particular move short is one of these 2 scenarios and not this third bullish scenario. So personally, I'd rather be a little bit cautious, even a little hint bearish on this particular move for the reality of the bigger picture, right? For the benefit of the bigger picture, right? This is the kind of sacrifice. Now, obviously for me, I couldn't care less, right? I'm not trading this, I'm not in this, right? One of the things that I've done recently, I talked about this, especially to our members. One of the things I've done recently, and a lot of people say it's kind of a brave decision, it's a stupid decision, it's one of these decisions, but it was my decision. One of the things that I've done was I actually sold all of my Bitcoin. This was me jumping out 100% at the 60k market. Right? So again, let me explain this. The reason that I jumped out at the 60k market is we've had a long time, right? I've been in this for 13 years now. And I kind of got excited for this move. And like I said, I left it a little bit on the table thinking, what if? What actually happened was in 2011, my grandmother had sent 50 British pounds to an account, right? And I actually made a mistake that has actually been more than valuable. So the mistake was my grandmother had sent this for my son, and basically a couple of days before, I'd actually used an account to buy Bitcoin without thinking. I'd give the wrong account details to my grandmother and ended up with another 6 Bitcoin. Long story short, the money was actually for my son's birthday, and I decided to just kind of sit on it. Right? So my son was only what, 1 or 2 at the time, and we decided that it was a punt. Right? It was a 50 quid punt. It's kind of how we see it. Obviously, £50 into 50, into dollars was 70 or whatever it was at the time, minus the fees, the exchange rate, and so on. So, it again, kind of lucky, right place, right time. The reason that I've kept that is for my son. He's now 13 and, ultimately 14 in the next couple of weeks. The the reality is, it's a punt, right? Like I said, right place, right time. Let's see where it goes, right? If he wants to sell it, when he turns 18, it's kind of on him, right? But at that particular point, for me personally, I'm kind of done and out. We got to this stage of it being 60K. I'm kind of happy. I'm in the middle of renovating a property. I want to build my pool. There's a few things I want to do, kind of myself. And, it's just kind of the time. So I kind of felt from these highs at kind of 69 here all the way through, if we do end up with a much larger move in terms of the kind of corrective move or an impulsive move that, you know, kind of drags its feet, then I'm not really wanting to wait another 3 years for my kind of exit strategy. Like I said, it was a kind of a free punt. It's been kind of a great ride. Kind of enjoyed the ride, and what I'm enjoying at the moment is more the psychology behind these moves. All right. So with that being said, right, everything that I've covered, like I said, don't take this as kind of negative. Don't take this as positive. Right? I'm just kind of giving the reality of the types of moves. Right? The biggest question for me in terms of kind of the bearish nature is we don't have to go deep. Right? I think realistically we're more likely to go kind of sideways and down and sideways and down and sideways and down. More frustration for retail with a view of them trying to get people to kind of sell it, right? So the time period is probably more valuable than the actual price points, right? That's the kind of the first thing. In terms of a bullish narrative, you know, I kind of fear, a large number, right? Even if we doubled where we are right now, there's plenty of opportunities in the forex market to do that, kind of week in, week out, right? I'm not waiting another 3 years to kind of double my money, right? That's not my, my kind of play for this anymore, right? Where I kind of feel, I guess, kind of apprehension, right, is we've come up to the kind of old all-time high. Right? We've kind of poked in for less than a minute above the old all-time high. We then drop down 15%, right? The kind of the intent is kind of showing there. We've got the COT data, leverage funds. These guys are still selling at a premium, right? It's kind of great for them. It's bigger picture. It's a bit ugly. It's a bit messy. Right? We've had 12 ETFs approved, and we're still struggling to pierce the current all-time high. Right? We're kind of piercing that 70K marker, right? Which means there's an awful lot of liquidity sitting just above that, right? Now, if I turn the drawings off and I put, an indicator on, what we've got kind of clear as day, right, is the ramp in volume, right, kind of, it's the opposite way, right? The ski slope is kind of down, not up. We've actually got some outside liquidity, kind of all the way down here. We've got massive, massive level. Like I said, I think kind of, anything, kind of 28 and a little bit, right? We've got obviously the base built up and around this area, which is kind of 46 down to 41-ish. And the ugliest part of all is that we've come out, we kind of grabbing liquidity and we kind of struggling, maybe struggling is the best word. I think we're kind of struggling here. And I think that's because we had this kind of fake move on the BlackRock news. We then had the kind of the approvals, and we've kind of gone up really with no, with no pullback. And I just don't see a very likely scenario where it kind of rallies on much more without the very aggressive. And I think, aggressive drops can turn into fear. I think fear can obviously fuel then kind of more of a drop. And therefore, I think, the main bit of advice I can give you guys, if you are still playing with this, and you're still wanting to play with this in the kind of short to medium term, I think just tread carefully. I think for me, going forward, my take on this, over the next, kind of maybe 18 months, I think is just to take this kind of smaller time frame stuff, right? I don't think I'm looking now at the kind of the bigger cycle. I think I want confirmation of the bigger cycle, and I think that confirmation will come in kind of the form of the pullback, right? So it's almost like the character of the pullback will give me the clues as to what we do, where we go from there. I think until then, it's not that all that interesting. I think I've kind of been said lucky, kind of got out altogether, and I'm in a position right now where if it runs away, my son's a happy chappy. If it obviously comes back, if I'm honest, I don't even know if I'm going to actually bother with it again. I think I might use it more for the short time frame, kind of 1 minute, 15-minute kind of type trades, and use it a little bit more just in terms of the analogies and using it more because right now, seeing the transition into the institutional kind of playbook, it's been incredible and fascinating to watch. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. So I know this one was a much longer video than I kind of wanted to do, and I know it's me kind of ranting on, but I kind of think that, from people who follow me, if you're still obviously kind of watching this at this kind of stage in the video, I hope this, kind of helped you guys see what I'm seeing, why I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And, for obviously you guys who are clearly not watching this, you kind of heard one word bearish and probably bailed. So, I think in the long run, guys, just be sensible, be safe, kind of use those stops. If you've been lucky and you're kind of in this, from an early stage or you're kind of still in this and you've rallied up from 20, 30, 40K, whatever you've kind of decided to get in, then all I can say is maybe trail those stops, and profit, kind of life's too short not to enjoy kind of the ride along the way. And I think that's the main thing. So anyway, I'm going to leave it like that. Again, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on my next stream. Cheers.